Okay,
welcome
great.
everyone, and yeah, I hope you find some great insights from today's session and some training on the data tools from Council's website. I'll follow up afterwards with a recording of the presentation and a link to the tools on Council's website as well. Thanks everyone.
Thanks. The good news is you don't have to remember any of the stuff I'm about to tell you. I've given you my email address in the chat there, so you can email me at any time. The council is a partner or a client of ours, so that means that you are as well. So any business in Byron Shire can call us at any time and ask for support on data. It sounds generous, but we always like our phone to ring. Right? Better ringing than not ringing. And that's how we learn how people are using the tools and how we can develop them further. So hopefully this, encourages enough interest that you can get on to the live tools. And that's really the North Star, at the point of this whole exercise, is that I'm giving you some information. Hopefully you can learn something, but really, if you can just get a bit more confidence to find where these tools are that the council subscribe to, and then get on there yourself and have a drive of them and use them in your business activities. I think that's all I'm really trying to help with today. So for those who don't know ID, we're a business. We specialise in local councils. We've got hundreds of local councils around Australia. Every council in the Northern Rivers, pretty much every council north up until about, I think Mackay is the first one you'll hit. Without our stuff and heading south, you probably get to, I don't know, Lake Macquarie, I think, is the first one you'll hit going south. So we've got lots of these things around the place. And what we're known for is being able to help people make decisions at a local level. Whether it's local government, whether it's businesses, communities, state governments, everyone has lots of access to lots of macro data. We're famous, if you like, for being able to drill down into suburbs, local government areas, and even smaller. So what I'm going to show you today is a bit of a story about your place, but then when we go, I'll show you the live tools also that allow you to drill down into very small, what we call geographies, but very small areas. We do that from a number of perspectives. There's the demographic perspective, which is really just about the residents or the people in an area. Mainly, we source that from the census, so you all filled out the census, hopefully. I don't work for the census, but I think they find one person in 100 years or something. But most of the demographic information comes from the census. We're doing another one next year. We have economic data, so we're looking at jobs and industry. We have housing data about development and different types of dwellings that are being built or should be built or shouldn't be built, or we can model different things, especially for land use planners. We have a proponent come and say to councils, oh, we would like to do this, and then they come to places like us and try and model the effects of those. We also do population forecasting. We don't do that specifically for Byron, we do it for a few of your neighbours, but we're able to tell you for the next 25 years what the likely change is in age groups and things like that. There's a whole bunch of other things we do too, but they're the main categories. But this is the process that we're trying to help inform. We want you to learn about your place, so discover new things, but that's the fun stuff. It's not always about the fun stuff. In that learning phase, we also want to help, in your case, businesses not just learn, but also have evidence for things that you may already know, but you need evidence when you go for grants, when you're talking to supporting to small businesses, trying to support them. You know, I have lots of older people live in this particular catchment. Well, is that true or not true? This isn't just about light bulbs going off. This is actually just having evidence to support whether you're right or wrong. So it's a bit of a different angle, I suppose. We want you to be able to respond. So once you learn, we want to build tools and services that allow you to be flexible, basically so you can copy and paste that data into your information and into your paperwork, into your strategies, into your planning, without needing a degree in data analytics or anything like that. So we want to be able to use them. And then lastly, we want to be able to monitor your place. And Byron subscribes to a tool that we have about your economy that we update very regularly that allows you to do that. Sorry? Cool. I might just get you to mute your microphone if you're not talking, but feel free to switch it back on, interrupt me at any time if you've got any questions as I go. So Byron have got 3 tools that they subscribe to from us. Profile and Atlas are primarily about the residential population and are the demographic tools based on the census that I spoke about. Profile ID is 25 years of historic data. It drills down into suburbs and gives you 25 years of historic data. There's a lot of data management involved in making sure that geographies and areas that exist now that didn't exist 15, 20 years ago are able to be compared against over time. So we have those different time series in there. It gives us sort of that short and medium and long range view about how a place is changing. Atlas ID is a mapping tool that allows you to drill down into about 400 households. There's hundreds of characteristics, so we can tell you where older lone persons are concentrated, where disengaged youth are or aren't, or where that's changing over time, down to very small areas. And then thirdly, you've got Economy ID, which is about jobs and industry, and we'll cover that a little bit through this presentation. But the main feature with that tool is that we update that annually. So just before I get on and on to the next section, I'll just tell you what's about to come. Just for the housekeeping, if you do have any questions, just unmute and interrupt me, or down the bottom of the screen, there's there should be something with, I think it's reactions, I think it's called, where you can put your hand up. But Lisa, I'll just ask you again, like last session, to keep an eye on that in case I'm waffling on and I'm not concentrating on that. But feel free just to switch your microphone on and interrupt. If people want to take phone calls or walk off or anything like that, that's fine with me. I'm going to cover a story about Byron based on the data tools that we provide. It's not the story. Each of you will have different things you want to tell. Then I'll get on to the tools, where to find them, how to use them. And then if we've got time at the end, we'll do a bit of a Q&A and see if there's any specific things that you'd like to know based on what you've seen so far. So I'm just going to have a sip of water. As I said, don't feel like you're rude by interrupting. I prefer it that way rather than you having to remember what your question was. But if you don't want to do that, that's fine. You can email me later at that email address that I posted in the chat. Okay, so here's the fun bit where I just start throwing a bunch of slides at you with charts and tables and numbers. That way I'm going to interpret or tell you the story. And really, this is how I'm going to simulate how you should use these numbers yourselves. Tell a narrative, tell a story about people, about your place. And if people don't believe me, if they need some evidence, refer to the numbers, refer to the chart. That's how our sites are designed to be used. So Byron has a population, as you see in the top left-hand corner, of 35,000 people. Just a tad over. That's known as the ERP. That's an annual figure that gets published by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. That's what the ABS stands for. And it's a modelled figure. What does that mean? It means it's made up. We make up some numbers too. They make up some numbers. We all tend to have our own models that account for change over time. What we do have is an agreement in 2016. That's what's so good about the census. Everyone agrees once the census figures out that they're, if you like, real numbers. I think it was 96.1% of people filled it out accurately. I think that number's right in the last census. I don't know if you've done any surveys yourself, but getting that percentage of 100 people to do anything is pretty good, never mind of 25 million people. So everyone feels that the census is very, very reliable. Then we all have different methods of accounting for change over time, and this is the ABS's method. This chart that we're looking at here is how many people have been added to the Byron population each year using this ERP method. They use things like change of addresses in Medicare and births and deaths and overseas migration. And they're pretty good at what they do. We can see that anywhere between sort of 400 to 600 people have been added to the Byron population each year since about 2012. So that's pretty predictable and stable figures. That's pretty, I'm not sure if, I do know that I'm from up that way, so I do know there's a wide spectrum of opinions on growth and whether it's good or otherwise. But you're sort of sitting right in that slot of not very high growth, but some growth. So you're not going backwards. If you sit in the camp like I do personally, that growth is good, you're probably a bit underdone. You're probably not getting enough growth. That's what I would think of a place like Byron and all of regional Australia tends to be in the same boat. You're on par with a lot of regional Australia. Actually, I wouldn't say that your percentage is like a lot higher than some other places, even though it is in the top half of regional Australia. A lot of regional, the bottom half of regional Australia, though, is in decline, where people are moving to places like Byron or to the metros or greater capital cities. But this has been pretty stable growth. And in the last year, this is what it was based on. The ERP is broken down by this, and we can't assume this has happened every year, but this just is a bit of that, look at the duck on the pond. Sometimes we look at these total figures, but then if we go down, we look at what's happening behind those figures. It gives us a bit of an idea about your unique situation. So natural increase is the results of births and deaths. So you added 163 more people than died, if you like. More people than that were born, but this is the net off. 50 people moved in from other parts of Australia compared to those that left. So again, that's the net. And the net overseas migration is 323. So in the last year of figures, the biggest driver of growth was people coming from overseas. Now, this is an important thing to pull apart because right now we're going through, what most of our living memories wouldn't have seen before. I don't think anyone in the room is old enough. Each of these three are going to be affected, they're going to have downward pressure. So natural increase, we've had lots of queries as demographic experts about the birth rates going up. People expect them to go up because we're all at home cuddling. No, we expect it to go down. After these sorts of things, especially in a place with higher education like Australia and Byron, the higher, the more skills and qualifications, that's one of the clearest links to fertility rates and birth rates that we see. But in times of economic difficulties and unsure conditions, birth rates tend to go down. So we can expect that 163 may come down in the following year. Net internal migration, again, mobility is often affected. When people see that there's unsure economic conditions, they're less likely to move. So that is likely to come down. And then net overseas migration. So net overseas migration, the tap's been switched off. There's no one coming at the moment, and they won't be for a while. And we're all waiting with bated breath to see what's going on there. So on each front, these numbers here that we've already looked at, so up to 600 a year, each component of change is going to be, has got downward pressure on it. So we're not expecting that next year's figures are going to maintain this stable outlook, which for businesses has a very important impact. These are new workers, these are new clients, these are new customers. This is now looking at the census figures. We don't know one has modelled.
Ryan?
Yes.
Ryan, can I jump in there just for a sec, because I don't want to leave it till the end because I may not be here. That is counterintuitive to what's happening with me and my business. I'm actually experiencing a large demand from people coming from the cities wanting to move to Byron. So my estimate, just for your information, would be that we're not going to see that internal migration change diminish. If anything, all the real estate agents and myself are feeling we're seeing big demand post-COVID. So just to let you know.
Sure. So post-COVID, what year are you putting post-COVID? What's post-COVID?
Now, as in after a few weeks of April, and since end of April, May, now we're seeing large demand for people moving to the Shire.
Okay. So we'll see in March of next year is when we'll actually get to see those figures. That's when the new figures will come out.
Okay, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it will be. So that ERP, what they'll be able to tell you is that exact slide that I'm showing you now. We'll be able to tell you that we should be able to tell you where they're coming from too. But I've got a bit more of information on that stuff as well. So your age group is tending to be around these sort of mature families, empty nesters, not so much the retiree age group, more around people that are still very much, whether they're sort of officially retired or not, but sort of still in the, let's call it the accumulation phase if you want to talk about retirement, but we're talking about in the social services, they might call that contributors to, often once we're over 65, that's a term that gets bandied around. What they're trying to talk about is, tax paying years, but either way, we can see that there's a dominance in every age group from 35 to 64 in Byron. The age groups that are growing most, though, are around that retirement age. I mean, what is retirement age, especially around Byron? But, typically, in recent years, we would have said 65, but up until about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, we know that that's all up for debate now, but that's where a lot of the growth has been. So that's typically how we tell a story at ID. We compare it to another place. So compared to regional New South Wales, you've got more of these 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds, less of these 20-year-olds and less of these late teens and less of the seniors. Then the other way we tell the story is how is it changing over time. And in 5 years leading up to the last census, we're seeing growth in these age groups. But, that's just for the whole of the LGA. There is, a range of different age groups where we're seeing Brunswick Heads is much older and Suffolk Park and Broken Head. So the median age there is, nearly 10 years difference, which is quite significant in demographic terms. We can also drill down into smaller areas as I was talking. This is a screen capture, that's why it's a bit foggy actually, but from the Atlas tool that I'll show you, you can actually look at all of the age characteristics and all the characteristics on our tools down to these very small precincts. These are known as SA1s, each one of these shapes, and they're designed to be 400 households. They don't always work that way because the ABS, it's an algorithm they have, and sometimes there's a lot more development than they assume. But it's a really good way of being able to drill in and zoom in. It's a very small area and look at the characteristics. So we can see that there's some hot spots of 70-year-olds and there's other hot spots of 30-year-olds. So for those of you who have got particular cohorts that you're interested in, this is a really powerful way to drill down and find out exactly where there's concentrations of them. So here's that migration story. We're seeing a lot of these 25 and 44-year-olds moving in and 18 to 24-year-olds moving out. So this is no secret. This is not news. This is really just putting some scale to it. 18 to 24-year-olds generally want to leave places with Shire in their name or regional areas. And where are they going to? Your 18 to 24-year-olds are going to Brisbane, Gold Coast, Moreland, Yarra, so they're in Melbourne, Sydney, Melbourne, Inner West. These, they're going to the big smoke. They're going for jobs, education. They're travelling long distances. But then when we look at the cohort of people who are coming in, and this may speak a bit about what we were saying before, Michael, where people are coming in from, they're tending to be Sydney, Northern Beaches, so the Insular Peninsula, Waverley, that's, so Mona Vale, Bondi, City of Sydney, Inner West, Central Coast, so a lot of beachy places in Sydney, very plugged into those areas. So, I know Central Coast is sort of similar to that area. Port Phillip, so which is St Kilda, is the first one that we hit, but that's got a beach. Mornington's got a beach. I mean, it's not many waves in Port Phillip, but I don't think every single one of those has a beach. Yeah, that's right. Every single one of those has a beach. So that tells you something, doesn't it, about the migration patterns, about what's happening. So one thing that I get this from the tool. One thing, if you want to know about some of that migration stuff and to really answer some of those questions about the likelihood of it continuing through COVID, we would go to those areas. So you don't look at Byron to figure that out. You go to Northern Beaches and you say, okay, what are their circumstances? What puts them in a position to be mobile or otherwise? What about Waverley? What about Sydney? What about Inner West? So will the Northern Beaches have the incomes and the propensities to continue that migration pattern moving forward? That's what our population forecasters would look for. So we've had a look a bit about the age. We've had a look at the net internal migration. Now this is just that third column about the overseas migration. Compared to other regional areas, you do have a higher proportion of people born overseas, and you do have, in New South Wales generally, you have a high proportion. And in Byron, you have had 15% of people who are born overseas come in the last 5 years. We've had a long history of that. All of this trend is on hold for right now. So a lot of that growth, let's say that we can encourage the continuation of growth from that net overseas migration. That was only, what, 10% or less of all growth last year. Most of it, more than 50% of it, is not even going to be a smaller channel. It's going to be, it's being completely switched off at the moment, and there's no real indicator of when that's likely to come back on again. So that's going to be an interesting phase, especially for consumption-based businesses like retail and other things of the like, because a lot of the overseas component with tourism and other people moving there and people passing through are driving a lot of the economy as well. And they may not necessarily be there to purchase. But let's look at the economic stats. Now, this is from 2019. So we're moving, I've already sort of flagged that the economic data is not just census years, it's annual. So as at last year, there was your population, 16,000 jobs, 16,000 residents, approximately matching. We know they don't necessarily line up exactly. Some people leave for work and you import from particular industries, but accommodation and food services is your number one employer. For 5,000 businesses generating $1.8 billion of GRP, that's pretty healthy. So I'm just going to look at some of these annual figures to give you some trend about where we were just before COVID came in. You had more jobs in Byron than ever. So Byron is coming off really since about 2015. So if you look at 11, 12, 13, 14, there were even a couple of years of decline, just pardon me, a little bit of decline, but since 2015, we've really seen an uptick in jobs in Byron. And like I said, you've never had more jobs there than before COVID came along. In the last 5 years, lots of growth in accommodation and food services, construction, retail, health and social assistance. Now, most of those we've seen throughout Australia. That's quite, you're plugged in through trends that we're seeing in the rest of Australia. But it's quite a diverse mix, which is healthy. We're seeing increases in ag, increases in manufacturing, increases in a bunch of different... Sorry, I saw someone chat there, but I missed that. There we go. The unemployment figure was for the Byron. I've got a question here. Any idea what the unemployment figure? When you say was, what time are you thinking of? Anyway, I can say I'll get back to you when we get to the live tour. Make sure I can look at the unemployment rate. But you have seen some healthy change across a number of different industries. Okay, I can see the chat's back up. Right, well, so I've just had a question on the chat about what was that employment for you compared to, I'm assuming these rates here. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can tell you that the unemployment rate only goes to about here because they keep changing the methodology on us. And for a place like Byron, it's a bit tricky as well because you've got participation rates because you've got a lot of changing up and down. So the unemployment rate only measures those people who signify their participants. So you're going to have a lot of people coming in and out of the workforce that have interesting impacts on the unemployment rate. Through COVID, we're recommending not to use the unemployment rate as a proxy of the health of the economy because a couple of weeks ago, they reported that 5.6 million Australians are reporting that, which is, a third of all workers really, are reporting that they've got less hours than normal. So they won't come up in the unemployment rate. But then you've got another, I think it was 2.8 million who have lost their job, but they're not looking for a job. So there's 8 million, 9 million people who are significantly affected by COVID who aren't being shown in the unemployment stats. That's why nationally they've only gone up to about 6.6 instead of the 15% we were worried about. There's a lot of factors that mean they get excluded from those numbers. I'm assuming the feds are pretty happy with the way that is too, because it means that the numbers don't look so bad. The chat just popped up again, so I'm just going to have a look at that. I don't know what's happening with the chat. For some reason, that chat's not popping up for me. I'll have to come back to that. But if what is it, Tony or is it Troy? Is he gone?
Ryan, it was Tony just thanking you.
Oh, okay, no worries. So here are the dominant sectors that we see in Byron. And we can look at retail is very strong. Accommodation compared to the rest of New South Wales. Accommodation and food is really dominant. Education is very strong. Health is very strong. Since the net overseas migration leapt up in about 10 years ago, we're seeing these population-based and these spending, consumption-based sectors just grow everywhere and dominate all of Australia. So we see places like Gold Coast or Logan still very strong in manufacturing. Western suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne very strong in manufacturing. Agriculture, you can see in Byron, is very strong, but you're dominant in these population-based sectors. Even construction is a population-based sector, though you're not as strong in that compared to the rest of New South Wales. This is very much tied with your tourism sector. Retail isn't always tied with tourism, but it is in Byron Shire. GRP is also up. So this looks like the same shape as jobs, but it's not jobs. It's the value of your economy, and it's very much in line with jobs, and it's also much in line with this here. So as you employ more people in retail and more people in accommodation food, that builds a capacity to spend more, and that's what's growing the size of your economy. It's not necessarily, just from those few slides, that's telling me that it's not necessarily big productivity gains. So you can see GRP go up and unemployment not go up if you're high in manufacturing, maybe ag, but it's not necessarily productivity. It's this 1-for-1 ratio, which means that you're very reliant on human capital of people. So your economy to grow, as at 2019, the last 5 years, has been, well, the more people we hire, that builds a capacity to meet the extra demand. Output is interesting. So Michael, this is sort of in line with what you're saying about some of that growth in real estate, construction, and real estate. So real estate, for every dollar created in Byron Shire, for every $4, one of them comes from real estate. And then another 12.5% comes from the construction industry. So they're obviously very closely related. So if you're talking about jobs, it's all about tourism and accommodation and food and retail. When you're talking about value and the output, we're talking about very, very dominant in that construction and real estate sector. Really what we're saying here is if your accommodation, food and retail gets affected, that's going to affect jobs. But then we want to see how well insulated we are in terms of our real estate and our construction, because that's obviously driving a lot of the economy also. Employed residents is the third part of this puzzle. So we've looked at jobs and local workers sort of as a proxy of business. Then we look at output, and again, we're looking at the value of your economy, and that is a good way of comparing yourselves to other areas. But now we're looking at employed residents, and that's a bit more of a socio-economic story. And again, that shape looks very similar. I can tell you doing these things all over Australia, that shape between your jobs, value, and employed residents aren't always the same, but here it is. I think it's because you've got quite a self-contained area, and when you've got 16,000 jobs and employed residents matching so closely, that tends to happen as well. But there are a bit of a mismatch, and this might just help with the definition of what I'm talking about too. The dark green.
Sorry, Ryan. Tony's just put another question up on the chat about Airbnb.
Sure. Could you just read it out to me, because it's the chat's not
Does
really
that
working.
include Airbnb?
No, it does not include Airbnb. It doesn't. So there are some ways that we can track Airbnb, but it won't come up through real estate, and it won't come up through construction. If in some circumstances they're going through those businesses, they can do, but no, sorry. If that's something we want to track.
Well, I would dispute that, in that if they're going through a registered company like a Perfect Place or a real estate agent that manages Airbnb, I'm sure they would go through as registered in the accommodation and retail business. But if they're independent Airbnb, I think you're thinking that if they're renting it through their own auspices, a single home, yes, it wouldn't show up. But I think if it goes through a real estate or a registered holiday let company, I think it would.
That's right. That's right. So that's what I was alluding to when I said if it goes through those industries. So I think you're right there, but I don't think I couldn't definitively say that either of our explanations is the 100% answer. So if that's something that you want to pull apart, I'm happy to work with anyone outside of this to really dig deep in that. It's actually quite easy now to scrape the Airbnb data to see what it is, what's going on there. Are there many Airbnbs that go through real estate agents nowadays? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I'd say over half.
Oh, right. Interesting. So why do they do that? Why doesn't real estate just do it directly, and then they don't have to give a cut to Airbnb?
That's the big debate. That's a whole other webinar, I'm afraid. That's the complaint against Airbnb, that it was supposed to be for single homes within houses or a studio managed independently as a cottage industry. But now it's in Byron Bay. It's become like a more than a cottage industry. It's become an industry in itself. And a lot of places are bought and renovated for the Airbnb industry, and they're managed by businesses, accommodation businesses. There'd be 3 or 4 that are set up that are running like 50 or so houses at a time.
Right. Wow. Well, we should be building some more holiday accommodation.
People like to stay in single houses with their own kitchen and their own yard for their kids and their own pool. People like that kind of accommodation.
Sure. Well, let's build that stuff then.
Some people don't like it. Some people don't like noisy neighbours when people come to holiday. But that's been managed better than it has been.
Sure. So, I mean, one of the good problems to have in Byron is you've built this wonderful oasis in the world that everybody wants to be a part of. And that presents a whole range of opportunities and challenges. And one of those is how do you accommodate everyone, and how do you take in the tourist dollar whilst managing the negative, let's call them sort of externalities on the amenity in the area for locals. Obviously, that's a debate that's going to go on forever in Byron, I suspect. And to be honest, a lot of you in this room and the council and people like myself are sort of the custodians of that conversation. Often it's the residents don't have as much influence as people who get involved in the business community to actually steer that ship somewhat. Anyway, so the dark green here that we're looking at, that's local jobs, and the light green are employed residents. When we say employed residents, we're talking about people who live in Byron and have a job in that sector, but they can actually work anywhere. So what it's saying is that you actually need to import people to work in accommodation and food. You need to import people to work in retail. You need to import people in manufacturing and construction, whereas in professional services, you export. And in education, you export. And in healthcare, you export people. So whilst you've got this net off that's very close to that, around that 16,000 mark, there's a lot of interesting things here so you have, professional services people come and live in Byron, but they need to leave for work, potentially, because there's not enough jobs filled here. So this can be, on the live site, we can show you this changing over time. It does present some interesting trends that might be relevant, but this is just to give you an idea of what an employed resident is. So as we move forward to look at just some of the immediate impacts of COVID, a lot of the information I've shown you is sort of the pre-COVID stuff, but we've also got some data that we've published for Byron about the immediate impacts. And in a few weeks, we'll start modelling some forecast data on the recovery time. So over the next 12 months, let's say. I'll just show you some of the impacts. So Byron is tending to be much more impacted than regional NSW, the whole state, and the rest of Australia in percentage terms. So the local jobs, the employed residents, and GRP, nearly 20% of your local jobs are either lost or only surviving with zero productivity because of JobKeeper. 20%. This figure is showing what is the impact on your economy in the June quarter. So just between April 1 and June 30. So these figures will be replaced with July to December or some other period. But we just have done some modelling. We actually partnered with a crowd called NIA, National Economics. They're well known by all the state and federal treasuries for this work. So there's the back end. If you're up for a really interesting technical 29-page read on the model, I couldn't think of anything worse. It is on the site if you're interested in that sort of stuff. But we're knowing for your shire, you're one of the most significantly affected because of those industries that I was talking about earlier. Part of the reason why I showed you those slides is because I wanted to demonstrate how exposed you were to this tourism related, through tourism related sectors. Because you've got accommodation and food, because you've got retail, that through the lockdowns and through all the types of things that bring about this downward pressure through COVID, you've got a lot of those characteristics. We do this by industry. So this is the absolute change on jobs in Byron. So just in that June quarter, April to June 30, the accommodation and food services we model have lost about 700 jobs, and the yellow component is the JobKeeper component. Now, when we say JobKeeper, that's not just jobs lost. That's not every job on JobKeeper, That's jobs on JobKeeper with effectively zero productivity. So there will be more people than that on JobKeeper, but these are the jobs that are just being, people are getting their $750 a week, and they're not being asked to do many hours for that. So the reason we include them here is because they're the at-risk jobs. They're the most at risk. If JobKeeper finishes, they're not likely to even survive till September, is really what we're saying here. So some of those are more affected than others. Accommodation and food clearly is the number one, followed by retail. We also show these are the same numbers, but we're showing percentage change now. So I'm just going to flick between the two slides. Arts and rec, I'm saying, are only losing 250 jobs. I say only losing. That's, half of that is a job lost. Half of it is a job that's holding on through JobKeeper. But when we look at that number in percentage terms, that accounts for over 60% of that whole sector. So it's important that you look at it not just in absolute numbers, but in percentage to see how decimated is a sector just in this quarter. Excuse me. So ultimately, what we're trying to do with these figures is try and help everyone paint a picture by industry at LGA, local government area level. What is the recovery time frame? So that's probably what the next iteration of these numbers will look like. What do I mean by that? So you might have heard of like a V recovery or a snapback, or all of these ways to describe when is an industry going to bottom out and how quickly is it going to recover? That's the question on everybody's lips. So what we're hoping to do, and this is the beginning of that, is to try and tell you by industry what we're expecting each of those sectors to do. So there's two that we know about already. accommodation and food services, whilst we're in the first wave, has potentially bottomed out in terms of had the most downturn that we're going to see. And now we just need to look at the trajectory of change. How quickly can people hire? How quickly can people get those JobKeeper roles back to full productivity? How quickly are people willing to be out in the retail space? All of these things. So accommodation and food and retail, maybe it has bottomed out. Maybe we're going to see another dip with a second wave of lockdowns, and maybe in Victoria we're displaying that now. Real estate, and construction, particularly construction, but there'll be a flow on into real estate. We're expecting that downturn is likely to be more around the September, October, November period. We know that approvals haven't dipped in a lot of LGAs around Australia. Approvals of dwellings have actually, there's been a bit of an uptick as a lot of people try and get things through in anticipation of COVID. But in terms of sales in those areas, so the retail sales of new dwellings, which can be a bit disconnected from approvals, we know that they're down, and we're just waiting to see what that impact is. But right now, we're anticipating that maybe construction is likely to tail off later in the year. So that dip is yet to occur in that sector. So right now, it's actually holding on. And then we look at healthcare. There's another good example. Healthcare actually has seen an increase. So it's 10% increase in jobs. If I go back here, it's nearly 250 extra jobs. A little bit that it has been in building the capacity to respond to the health impacts, like more doctors and nurses, but most of that has actually been in extra cleaning staff and extra consultants to try and measure risk in the lead up to COVID. So we're seeing this everywhere. And once we get some new figures, which are a couple of weeks away, so not very far, we're going to be giving forecasts out to probably the end of the year. So hopefully we can really start to map. We're still figuring out the best way to communicate, the best visual communication. We might see a few more line charts or something. But this is just showing you the impact by sector at the Shire level. The things we're going to look at as we update are, lockdown measures, different stimulus packages, when overseas migration can start again, and obviously when there's a vaccine. But there'll be local measures too. Shires the size of Byron and all through regional Australia generally don't have, multi-million dollar packages that are going to stimulate it. Local demand, sometimes at a municipal level or council level, it's not that easy. We're probably more focused on state stimulus at this current time. A lot of the national stuff's already been announced and is already part of our model, but it's going to be, we're going to have to be very responsive as new data comes in. And obviously there's some longer term impacts. So supply chains are going to be disrupted. It's not that easy. We know that sort of food product manufacturing and ag have built some very strong supply chains in Byron. Those things are not currently operating properly because of overseas markets aren't accessible. It's not just as easy as switching those on. My particular area of expertise is around household debt and public sector debt, and how confidence is going to be shaken. Again, it's not as easy as just switching things back on. Households, how are they saving? How are they spending during this period? What's the likelihood for people to start businesses, to hire again? All these things, we need to really be on our toes, because the old data sets that used to tell us about those, the old signals, aren't reliable any longer. So that's just a bit of a story as we see it from the Shire. So I'm just going to stop sharing my my screen now and say hello again. What I'm going to jump to now is the live tool, and give you a bit of an idea about how all of that stuff that I just showed you, I got from the tools that are available to all of you right now. So there's no passwords or anything. You can just get on and use them yourselves. So for the next section, I'm going to show you how you can do that, where to find them, and then a little bit of the tips on how to get in there and drive them. But before I do, I just want to take a breath and see if anyone's got any questions about any of that. It's a very broad story that I told you there. It's really, I've just spoken about the overall population growth and some of the drivers of that, and then some overall industry change, and with a little bit of COVID in there. The COVID numbers are quite sobering, though, I must say, especially for a place that's so focused on tourism-related sectors. So feel free to put it in the chat or just switch your microphone on, or just wait patiently while I go over to my screen. Where's it gone? Okay. Share my screen. Where then has it gone? They don't make it easy, do they? Sorry about this. That's what we came to see. Okay. How are we looking there, Lisa? Can you see that screen?
Can you hear me? Yes. Perfect.
Okay, great. So to access these tools, you go to id.com.au/Byron. It's in the PowerPoint presentation that I'll make available too. Maybe I'll just put that in the chat as well. I don't know why it's not letting me access the chat, but I'll put that in there now just to... But so that's in the chat right now, but most of our people that access these tools find it through Google. Google's your friend in that way. And what we see here is these are actually buttons. Community profile and the social atlas are the two about the community, and the economic profile is about jobs and industry. So I'll just quickly start on the community profile. This is what it looks like. You'll notice that the look and feel is very similar to what you saw in my presentation because I just copied and pasted it straight from these sites. And here's a few tips for you. One of the main things you want to be able to do on our sites is find the topic. The topic is what the ABS calls these things. I call them like characteristics or traits or whatever you want to call it, but there's two ways you can find those things. One is through this menu column on the left. So there's, you want to know about the population numbers, age of the population, ethnicity, birthplace, qualifications, industries, residents, childcare, care, households. You find it on the left-hand side, or if you scroll right down, scroll down, there's a site map that shows you all the topics here. Now, with this red tool, community profile, this is about the residential population. So everyone who lives here within this, everyone who lives within this boundary. It's not people who come in for work. It's not talking about people that work here. It's not talking about people that travel here. It's not people talking about temporary people. It's talking about people who live here. Now, I say that because that's what all the tools default to. There is some information here about people who were there on census night. And for Byron, that's particularly important because a bunch of people came and filled the census out there who don't necessarily live there. But I'll get to that. So I'm going to pick one of these and go to 5-year age groups. I just roll over the menu. It pops up and I click on it. I could also go down here and go to 5-year age groups here. But you'll notice that it's just the same as my presentation. I just went to export, top right-hand corner of every chart and table, and I hit that and it came up with a file that I could just use in my presentation. Now, remember I said we do this in everything at ID where we compare to another place. So that's what we're doing, comparing Byron to region of New South Wales. And if I scroll down, it'll show me change over time. These are the two charts that I showed you in my presentation. Now let's mix that up a bit. Maybe I don't just want to see the Shire. I can also look at suburbs. Let's look at Byron Bay itself. That's where your 25 to 29-year-olds are. How did that change over time? Interestingly, we've still got that same swelling of that age group there. We've just got a few more of these 30 to 35-year-olds. Now, just like I changed the area here, excuse me, with that drop down, I can also change the time with this drop down. 5, 10, 15-year period for usual residents. So if I want to see how Byron Bay has changed in its age group in the last 15 years, that's what this is telling me. So there's a lot more extra 60-year-olds, a couple of extra 25-year-olds. To me, the big story is the drop in these numbers. There used to be a lot more sort of those old, more mature families 15 years ago, which makes sense. That's probably in the category of, you know, what we thought we knew, and we just have some evidence for it. For me, it is anyway. Now, what I'll show you, if I go back here, and now I want to look at the birthplace of those people, when I now go to my chart, it's still locked on Byron Bay and that time period. So in Byron, English people, Kiwis, Yanks, Japanese people, Germans, Brazilians. How's it changed in 15 years? Drop in Kiwis, drop in Germans, increase in Brazilians. Households, let's go to dwelling type. How have dwellings changed in Byron over the last 15 years in Byron Bay? Okay, so it's dominant in separate houses. 56% of dwellings are separate houses, but there's a lot more medium density than the rest of regional New South Wales. Let's benchmark that to the Shire. Oh, come on. So yeah, there's more medium density in Byron Bay than compared to the Shire. And then high density is 3 stories and up. More of that, more caravans, more other, which is like shop top dwellings. Now let's compare that now to Northern Rivers. So I'm just demonstrating how you can use the tool. This isn't necessarily the most interesting story to tell, I know, but so interestingly, Byron Bay has less high density than the rest of Northern Rivers. How's that changing over time? Byron, in the last 15 years, added more separate houses, lost medium density, lost high density. Let's just look in the last 5 years. Interesting. So you've knocked down a bunch of townhouses and duplex to either build separate houses or high density. So Michael, that fits into your story about that's what people want. And my flippant remarks about, well, build that stuff if that's what people want. Looks like people are in Byron Bay. Are they doing that in Mullum? Let's have a look. No, they're building a lot more separate houses. They are building some medium density. Again, this is in the last 5 years. Very dominant in separate houses, though. Compared to Northern Rivers, there's not that much medium density. 0 high density. Let's look at the number of bedrooms. And now, now you're just watching me browse, really. And this is how the tool is designed to browse. So in Mullum, there's a lot more 3 bedrooms compared to Northern Rivers. Let's just compare it to the Shire now. So I can just have this, idea and go to that grey bar and change the parameters. You've seen growth in 1-bedroom places in Mullum, a decline in 2-bedroom. So hopefully that's just giving you a demo of how you can jump around and look at some of these characteristics. One thing we just added the other day, we normally do this more if we're dealing with council. I haven't even looked at this yet myself, but we're telling you how many people have got job seeker. So Byron has got 5,000 people, 21, see, there you go. So how's that? Our modelled figure said that you'd lose about 20% of jobs, and the Department of Social Services, which is, I think, does it say what month? This is from May. we're seeing is about that 20%. That's right. There we go. So that sort of justifies that. This is the first time I've actually opened that because that page is brand new, and it sort of justifies that our modelling guys are doing a good job, which is always a good thing. In 1 month, it's gone up 1,000 people in Byron, broken it down by the suburbs that we have available to us. Anyhow, where's one that it tells me households? Here we go. Household summary. Now, yes, in Mullum, there's 25% of households are lone person, and then you've got another 15%. So what's that? 40% of households are either lone person or one-parent families that have one adult in the household. That's a lot. We can see that when we compare that to Byron. Let's just compare that to Australia. More lone person households and more one-parent households. So Mullum is very well represented in that. But see how here we've got these A's? That takes us to the Atlas. So in this page, there's links to the other tools. In the job seeker, you might have seen there was a green square there. That's a link to the economic page. This is a link to the Atlas. Excuse me. So if I go here, click on that A, we'll open up a new browser window and we'll take you to the Atlas tool. Before I go here, I'll just point that out. If you please don't use Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer doesn't even support Internet Explorer anymore. They've moved on to Edge. Use any browser you like except for Internet Explorer, and that's just general advice for life. So it's specific advice for our tools, mainly because it doesn't support this sort of mapping functionality. I know that some of you might have old software. Councils in particular, they have all these legacy programs like accounting software they don't want to get rid of that they bought 100 years ago. In about 6 months, they're going to be forced to do that. So if you're looking for a business opportunity, build new accounting software for councils. There you go. Because they're about to have to swap that all out. I can't speak specifically for Byron, but I deal with hundreds of councils around Australia, and that's about to happen. Anyway, this is a map, and I don't know what your screen environment looks like, so I apologise if this doesn't look as good as it does on my screen, but we're looking at now a map of lone person households. Now, if I just flick this back on, it just shows you now the breakdown and how this is smaller as I zoom in than suburbs. So here's a good example of that. If I just slide this down, so this is showing me these different areas. That black line there is the difference between Brunswick Heads and the area above it. But these areas, if I click on them, it shows them. These are the SA1s that I was telling you about that account for about 400 households. So straight away, if I zoom out, it can tell me where are there concentrations of lone person households. So there's 62. I can look at percentage and number. My colleague prefers percentage because he wants to know high concentrations. I prefer number because I'm at heart, I'm a social policy guy. So often, you know, the more bums on seats, the more you need to, you know, that triggers extra service provision. But that's just me. If you go here, you can look at it by both, and we recommend you do. We can also look at change over time. So where do we see growth or decline? Here we see growth in lone person households. All through this southern part, we see decline in lone person households. Hopefully that's making sense. I'm just going to go back to 2016. Turn that up a bit. I'm just going to show you now what's available to you on this tool. Can you see that that menu on the left there? I'm going to assume yes. So there's population density, people who've moved in the last 5 years. So click on that and it will say, okay, there's a big concentration of all these mobile populations right throughout this part of Brunswick Heads. And then if we zoom in here, right there, where does Where is he? I think our founder lives there somewhere, I think. Or maybe he live here. Actually, I think he lives in there somewhere. I'm not sure he realises that he's right next to 67% of people in this area moved in the last 5 years. What's the median age of an area? Where are the 0 to 4-year-olds? Where are the 5 to 11-year-olds? Where are the lone person households? Where are the one-parent families with children? People born overseas? People working from home? People with housing stress, incomes? Where's incomes? Where's the high-income household? So what we do is then we go, okay, Bangalore. There's a whole area here or in here of people with high-income households. What other characteristics are they high in? What's the median age there? Okay, 42 there, 46 there. And I just browse around, picking the characteristics I want, and I could get a very detailed picture of those areas. So there's two ways to use the tool. Pick a characteristic, and then the map will show us where there's a high concentration, or pick an area and just scroll through the maps to see what the characteristics of that area are. Those tools are pretty basic to use. There's not much more to them other than what I've shown you. Lastly, there's the economic tool. It's the same look and feel. So you want a topic, you just go to the menu column on the left, or scroll down the bottom and pick a topic. Let's pick a topic, go straight to jobs. And we see, I've intentionally been going past the table because in these sorts of environments, Zoom meetings or whatever, they're not the best to use, but I can tell you can sort them to say which things are higher and lower. But I will also come back to the table in a second. What is going on here? Let's refresh that. Oh, that's great. I'm using my own internet, so I can't even blame council for those charts not rendering. Let me just go to another one and see if that maybe exports might be good. Okay, so I went here, I went to economic value, went to exports. These sessions aren't about showing you every single topic. They're designed so that A, you can find it, and then B, you can just browse around. So I encourage you to get on and just be curious. Exports in Byron. Combination of food is responsible for 30% of exports. Now, a particular feature of our tool is we can tell you the difference between international and domestic exports. You can't get that anywhere else at a local area level. So if I go to international exports, let's see if it's the same. I'm assuming yes. Manufacturing is suddenly up there. So 30% of your international exports come from manufacturing. If I click on the manufacturing line, it's coming from food product manufacturing. 16.46% of all international exports is coming from food product manufacturing. If I go up here, I can go up to industry focus now. Again, I'm not expecting you to remember where I'm clicking on. I'm trusting that if you're interested in this stuff that you're getting on and have a browse. And if you've got any questions, just email me anytime. You can email me 40 questions before I tell you you're asking me too many questions. I've actually never told, no, that's not true actually. I've told 3 or 4 paying clients have asked me too many questions. I'm not going to name any names. Some people are very hungry for data. We think that's a good thing. So this is now looking at employment for food product manufacturing. How's that? So employment we've already seen employment in Byron is up higher than it's ever been. That's not the case with food product manufacturing. We can see that, I'm going to compare that to Northern Rivers now actually. If I drill down, we can see that it used to be responsible for about 17% of Northern Rivers food product manufacturing employment. Now it's responsible for about 11%. And if we look at Northern Rivers generally has performed quite well. And whilst you have done okay, it is not as well as the rest of Northern Rivers. But maybe let's just look at our own performance. We can look at the actual numbers of employment here. Or if I scroll over the top, I can see how that's changing. But I think this is where the real interest is. If I go to the black bar again, the control bar, I'm able to look at different parts of that industry. So just keep that in mind, of the shape of employment. What's the shape of output? It's a bit similar, isn't it? What's the shape of exports? Yeah, it's sort of, they all seem to have a very similar shape, but there's obviously been some repositioning of this sector throughout these years. So I did see a chat come up, so I'm just going to maybe jump on that and see. No, it's not letting me. In this section here, allows you to pick a specific industry. So I can jump to agriculture now. There's agricultural exports. So that's interesting. So when exports were down, local food product manufacturing was up. And then as exports in agriculture have gone up, food product manufacturing has gone down locally. So maybe that's telling us that the agricultural sector was servicing that food product manufacturing, and as it's either declined, it's had to find some new sectors, or maybe as ag has found new export markets, that it's focused less on local sales, and that's had an impact on food product manufacturing. This doesn't definitively tell me that, but it certainly shows that there's some sort of correlation happening there. I don't think I'm going to go on too much more about some of the data that's available, but I encourage you to get on the columns on the left and just browse around. You can't break the thing. Please get in touch with me if you've got any information that you can't find, or if you've just got any general data questions. I'm going to stop sharing now. Great. So I've still got a few minutes. So if people have got any questions, I see that Tony and Michael have left the room, but that's okay. Maybe just let me know if you got anything out of that. Lisa, any other? Actually, with the time we got left, I will just show you a couple of things. We do have these auto reports. So if you want to run reports, you can go into this section here called reports. When you get on there, there are easy ways. You can either pick a suburb, or you can look at the whole shire. And it's sort of, we call it a la carte. So you can pick one of these, enter your email address in, and send yourself a report in PDF or Word form. Sometimes that's easier than just jumping around. But the best way to do it is when you find something that you're interested in, like businesses. So here's how businesses are changing over time in Byron. You can export straight from the charts, or maybe if I go to something else like the age of a particular sector, if I'm interested in that, I can go, see this export button in the top right hand corner? I can also export that whole page into a PDF. So I don't think that in, it's just a little pop-up that comes up. I think that because I'm sharing my screen this way, I don't think that's going to pop up, but that's just a way that you can get auto reports to help you there. But if you're working with a particular sector, I encourage you to even get on the reports, look at industry sector reports. You choose, you know, I want to look at food and beverage services. Click all of these, and then actually I'm just going to click on all of them and see what it sends me as well. Then I'll have one in my file that I can share the screen if anyone gets more interested in that. So I'll stop sharing now. Excellent. So I'm not sure if any of you have cameras on, but now's the time to switch them on and say hello. Otherwise, I'm happy to end it there. Just putting my email address there one more time. But that said, I know the council, and I should check with Lisa before I say these things, but the council are very good at supporting local businesses at Byron, and we also know that you've got a very good, healthy business community up there. Chamber of Commerce is very good. We're going to be doing some events later in the year. Hopefully, the council's keen to partner with us on that to do a few more specific topics, mainly around maybe how we can support the recovery phase of COVID. But keep an eye out for that. Please go to our website and sign up to our newsletter. We've got hundreds of thousands of users, and mainly that's because it's just really good content about different stories about how people can use data, and we're starting to publish a lot more around economic development and supporting businesses. So unless anyone's got any questions, I think I'll stop the recording. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Ryan. Really appreciate your time today, and I hope